That is under the framework of a policy that I thought was intended to actually elevate the conditions that Indigenous peoples in this country are living in. And you're saying, well, no, it's good enough that process made me money.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Arrivecan, the bane of the Liberal government, and the thorn that just keeps twisting in Justin Trudeau's side. The Globe and Mail reported yesterday something that Northern Perspective and our collaboration with Vesper reported months ago, that GC Strategies, Curatics, and Dalian have received $1 billion in federal contracts. However, as most of you that have been following this scandal know, a lot of that money was handed out under the Federal Indigenous Procurement Program, which went to Dalian. We now learn that this program was operating with no watchdog for years until recently when everything began to blow up.
Let's take a look.
This is the Globe and Mail article titled 3 Firms Tied to Arrivecan App Got $1 billion in Federal Contracts, Ottawa Reveals, written by Bill Curry. 3 government contractors involved in developing the Arrivecan app have received hundreds of federal contracts worth more than $1 billion over the past 13 years. Until now, the federal government has not been able to provide a clear breakdown of how much contract work the 3 companies have been awarded. The new numbers were provided to MPs on the Public Accounts Committee, and a copy was obtained by the Globe and Mail. The 3 companies have been at the center of parliamentary scrutiny into the sharp increase in federal outsourcing on professional services, from about $8 billion a year in 2016 to projections of more than $21 billion last year. And they can't blame Harper for this one because he wasn't Prime Minister in 2016.
But they can try.
Curatics Technology Consulting, Dalian Enterprises, and GC Strategies have all been suspended in recent months from further government work as the 3 companies have faced questions over their involvement with the Arrivecan app for cross-border travelers. The government has not provided a detailed explanation for the suspensions, but the companies are the subject of several continuing investigations. 2 of the 3 companies, Dalian and GC Strategies, have just 2 employees each, while Curatics has said it has about 40 staff.
Now, Dalian used to have 3 employees, but David Yeo would have us all believe that he has moved on to contract under the public service, so there's technically only 2 there now, even though he's saying that he left his digital signature with one of his employees.
The 3 companies are the subject of allegations of contracting misconduct, such as inflated resumes that are being probed by the RCMP. They have also been at the center of months of committee hearings as MPs question why the federal public service has become so reliant on IT staffing firms that win federal contracts and then subcontract most or all of the work to others in exchange for substantial commissions. In February, some media outlets reported inaccurate totals for the value of contracts awarded to GC Strategies based on a public database of contracts that the government has said can produce unreliable totals because of double counting of contracts and amended contracts. In response to questions from the Public Accounts Committee, Treasury Board Secretary Catherine Blewett recently provided MPs with an updated and detailed breakdown of contracts awarded to the 3 companies. Ms. Blewett has since left the role. The breakdown covers the period from January 1st, 2011 until February 16th. The records show Curatics received 541 contracts worth a combined $596.8 million. Dalian received 445 contracts worth $127.8 million. And Dalian and Curatics in joint venture received 122 contracts worth $189.5 million. That works out to more than $914 million for Dalian and Curatics combined. GC Strategies received 105 contracts with a combined total value of $100.3 million. That brings the total value of contracts awarded to the 3 companies to just more than $1 billion. Dalian, which describes itself as an Aboriginally owned company, regularly partners with Corradix, a larger non-Indigenous company, for the purposes of applying for contracts under the Federal Procurement Strategy for Indigenous Business. The founder of Dalian, David Yeo, is a great-grandson of David Franklin, a former chief of Alderville First Nation in Ontario.
$1 billion, folks. And yeah, we actually saw all these data problems when we were scrubbing the data when we were doing this with Vesper. I believe it was, last fall? And we saw the same things. There was double counting. There was amended contracts. It was something to go through and scrub all of that data down to try and get an accurate number. And it wasn't just with these three. There's all kinds of contracts that are like that. And, you know, the whole point of this site is to provide some transparency for what the public service is spending and what contracts that they have. The problem is there is no transparency because of the amount of bad data on there.
Yeah, I remember the two of you going through it together, and I was just like, what are you guys up to? And it seemed to take hours upon hours. You guys were just sifting through all this dirty data.
However, we were able to clean it up to a point where, you know, we believe that we arrived to near the truth, and it looks like we were pretty close. Now, here's the thing about this whole Indigenous procurement program. As we've heard, this is intended to have contracts given to Indigenous-owned businesses with a majority of Indigenous workers. Why would that be? Well, it's to encourage entrepreneurs and business owners on reserves and even off reserves that are Indigenous to, you know, really take advantage of this program to lift Indigenous people out of, you know, a lot of the poverty that they're in right now. And it gives them a bit of an advantage to get into some government contracts. So the merits or non-merits of that program can be debated at another time. But right now we're just focusing on that was what it was intended to do. Now, as we heard from David Yeo, in his committee testimony, he doesn't think that that's what it's for. He just thinks it's just for people like him who own the Indigenous businesses.
It's not made to help Indigenous communities across the country. It's made to help the entrepreneur that's trying to get government contracts to grow his business. So,
okay,
you know, in that context, it's not made for helping out Indigenous communities across the country.
So, from what I understand, you've gotten your company has received hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts from the Trudeau government since 2015. That is under the framework of a policy that I thought was intended to actually elevate the conditions that Indigenous peoples in this country are living in. And you're saying, well, no, it's good enough that process made me money.
Here's the thing. Even though Dalian was given a whole bunch of these contracts, over 100 million, Indigenous people actually didn't do any of the work because all they did was what GC Strategies does, which is what Corradix does. They just subcontracted it out to everybody else, non-Indigenous people. So this is the issue.
Well, and it's not the spirit of this program.
Right. And many of the MPs, even the Liberal MPs, if you recall, were taking issue with David Yeo and his answers in essentially abusing this program.
Well, I know Gord Johns was quite upset, and he's from the NDP.
Now, the interesting thing is if you recall, David Yeo was maintaining, oh, well, I actually worked with this guy, Frost, who created this program. So I helped co-author this and put it together.
In 2003, I was asked to participate in the creation of the Government of Canada's policy for the procurement strategy for Aboriginal business, or what is known today as the procurement strategy for Indigenous business. Mr. Alan Frost, myself, and many other Indigenous leaders created this policy that guides the Government of Canada today in supporting Indigenous businesses with federal government procurement opportunities.
And so we took his word on that and just looked at that and said, okay, so you helped actually create and develop this policy to personally benefit yourself? That's really what you're trying to say in committee? Well, here's the thing. You can't take David Yao at his word. Indigenous contracting program went years with no after-the-fact audits, despite cause for more oversight. What's an after-the-fact audit? Well, what that is that after a organization or organizations are given contracts under the Indigenous procurement program, an after-the-fact audit is the government goes back and actually audits those organizations just to make sure that they actually did qualify for that. That's an after-the-fact audit. The federal government went years without launching an after-the-fact audit of any of the companies that benefit from an Indigenous procurement program in spite of calls for increased oversight. According to information provided to the Globe and Mail by Indigenous Services Canada, the department has approved 4 such audits under the program since 2016, and all of those were launched within the past 2 years amid heightened scrutiny of the federal procurement practices. The department said audit data prior to 2016 could not be immediately provided because the information is stored on a legacy system. The value of government contracts awarded under the program has risen sharply to $862 million in the 2022-23 fiscal year, up from $170 million 5 years prior. Ottawa has also said it awarded $1.6 billion in contracts to Indigenous businesses in the 2022-23 fiscal year through the procurement program and other categories. So what does that really mean? It means that for about 6 years, nobody was checking this program. And in the last 5 years, the amount of money that has been awarded through this program has gone up by almost $700 million, and nobody was checking it.
That's a lot of taxpayer money. A lot.
Let's continue. 2 of the 4 audits involve Dalian Enterprises and Coradix Technology Consulting, which the department agreed to review in December after leaders of both companies faced questions from MPs about their involvement with the arrivecan app, as well as allegations of contracting misconduct. Indigenous groups, as well as one of the public servants who helped develop the program, have said in interviews that Ottawa needs to do much more to ensure that winners of these contracts are fulfilling the policy goals, namely the requirement that at least 1/3 of the work is performed by Indigenous workers. Now, if you recall, this is where we hypothesized that Dalian was actually exploiting this policy, because remember, at the time they had 3 employees, and David Yeo was one of the employees at the time. So 1 divided by 3 is 30%. 33% actually. So there's your 1/3. When you have 3 people and one of them's Indigenous, like, come on. And he's not even doing any work. All he's doing is signing the contract. The procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses, or PSIB, has become a focal point of broader parliamentary hearings into how Ottawa spends billions of dollars each year on outsourcing. Remember how we said that David Yeo said he collaborated with the author of this policy to actually put it together? The founder of Dalian, David Yeo, is a great-grandson of David Franklin, a former chief of Alderville First Nation, which is about a 90-minute drive northeast of Toronto. Dalian, Coradix, and the primary contractor on arrivecan, GC Strategies, have all been suspended from further federal contracting work. The federal government has not provided a detailed explanation for the suspensions. During his 2 appearances before parliamentary committees, Mr. Yeo has referred to the role he played in helping shape the program. He has twice invoked the name of a former public servant, Alan Frost, who he said he collaborated with to devise the terms of the policy. Quote, Alan Frost, many other Indigenous leaders, and I created this policy that guides the Government of Canada today in supporting Indigenous businesses with federal government procurement opportunities, end quote, he told MPs in October. Mr. Yeo made a similar comment about Mr. Frost when he appeared again before MPs in March after it had been revealed that Mr. Yeo was working for the Department of National Defence while Dalian was engaged in contract for D&D. Mr. Frost, 68 and now retired, told the Globe and Mail that the program was launched many years before he ever met Mr. Yeo, and disputed his contention that he was involved in creating the policy. Mr. Frost said the original idea for the program came from a line in the 1993 Liberal campaign platform known as the party's Red Book during the election that saw Jean Chrétien become Prime Minister. Mr. Frost was working as a policy advisor at Public Works, the federal department responsible for procurement. Shortly after the election, he was part of a team that helped craft a program in line with the platform pledge. Once it was ready to launch in 1996, Mr. Frost was moved over to the department then called Indian and Northern Affairs to help launch the program. He helped guide it for several more years, including as a senior program manager overseeing its operation. He said it was not until the early 2000s that he first met Mr. Yeo as part of meetings the department held with stakeholders to receive feedback on the program. Quote, "He did come to some of those, but to say he helped develop the policy is a fallacy," end quote, said Mr. Frost. Quote, "He had nothing to do with the development," end quote. Mr. Yeo did not respond to a request for comment.
Of course not.
So, yeah, I don't know why we should be surprised that these liars and crooks continue to lie about their involvement in this. I guess Yeo just figured that, maybe Mr. Frost was deceased at this point and couldn't be reached for comment because he obviously hadn't spoken to him in years. Frost had been retired for some time. But this all comes back to, what the heck is the government doing, or rather not doing? You're handing out $700 million under this program, and you're not checking it at all. Like, you went from $160 odd million to $870 million, and no one is looking at it and saying, oh, that went up a lot. Maybe we should actually see who was getting that money and if rules were followed. No, we'll just trust that all those companies that we gave $700 million to were operating above board. And you hope they were. You hope they were actually getting money and bidding on these contracts and receiving them in the spirit of the program. But we know for darn sure that Dalian was not. So there's going to be a lot of problems coming Dalian's way, because if it is indeed found, which I think it will be, that Dalian was awarded all of these contracts without applying to all of the rules as it relates to the Indigenous Procurement Service Program, I think they're going to have a lot of explaining to do, and I think it's just another case where Canadians deserve our money back.